And so over to our next guest, quite as well powerful, and she's among the people who have introduced me to the space and teaching us every now and then, and she's available all the time. Elsa, what can I say? So Elsa Stamatopoulou, she's the Director of Indigenous Peoples' Rights Program at the Institute of the Study of Human Rights in Columbia University in New York. She joined the university in 2011 after 31 years at the United Nations at a post in Vienna, Geneva, and New York in Indigenous affairs since 1981. Oh my goodness. I was thinking about less, but this Elsa is on another level. She has become the first chief of the Secretariat of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues in 2003. Academic background is in law, criminal justice system, international law, and political science. Her research and writings cover a variety of human rights topics. Oh my goodness. And just to say something before Elsa speaks, Elsa in Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, that is because she was part of the editorial of a book that we wrote together with Columbia University's Institute of the Study of Human Rights. Thank you so much for your leadership, Elsa. I wish I was gonna be the one talking again and taking you through the interview. Ghazali, please.
Go ahead. Seriously, you can take it. You can go. I'll start out with the first question, and you can take over. I'm very comfortable with that. So I'll do the first question, Elsa, and then I'll let Carson do the rest. Elsa, I'll do it quickly. What is the most significant time that you experienced in this movement? And welcome, of course.
So I want to say, first of all, congratulations for organizing this, to all of you personally and your organizations that have supported you. It's really fantastic during these times that we cannot be together physically to continue the work in this way. I know Andrea has done it and so many of you have done it, so I really appreciate it, and I don't miss an opportunity to participate when somebody opens this up. So this question that you're asking, Ghazali, is really very difficult for me because there have been so many amazing moments in the Indigenous movement, but I will tell you the one I choose. I think it is seeing the beginnings of Indigenous direct participation at the UN. I mean, I go back to 1982 and 1983 and seeing this exceptional, out of the ordinary and outside the UN rules participation that managed to become part now of the UN rules. First, what we called acquiescence. We were building this practice, we were giving it a name, and now to see that this participation is formally included even in the ECOSOC resolution that established the permanent forum, because the resolution referred to the practices of the working group, and that's how Indigenous peoples participate. So I think for me, having lived through that and the creation of this new customary rule of international law, I would call it today, is one of the most exciting things. And seeing the difference in the room of the working group on indigenous populations between 1982 and 1983, when they formalized, they said now Indigenous peoples can directly participate. Seeing this, it was really a feeling that Indigenous peoples were making history. It was history in the making as we were breathing in that room. So for me, this is the big thing. And it was also Indigenous peoples, linking up with the decolonization movement, the anti-racist movement, and all these are relevant today, of course. So I select this moment because it has also meant so much for the Indigenous movement at the international level until today.
Carson, I believe it's now your turn to ask a question.
Go ahead. I'll just come over. I have some questions for Professor Elsa. Just a few minutes. Just go ahead.
Okay, that's Elsa. Thank you so much. And what is, in your view, like the biggest change COVID-19 is bringing to Indigenous peoples, the movement? Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
I think that the biggest thing it's bringing is an urgency, and a sense of urgency. I mean, we all, when we are living in Indigenous communities, together with Indigenous communities, we know that there's always an urgency, but this one put our finger on this incredible risk and urgency that is reminiscent, actually, of the spreading of diseases in the earlier colonial times. So this is a moment that has to be, that brings those memories, and that I think re-energizes the Indigenous peoples and those around them, you know, about this urgency. So this is one of the things. The other thing that I find as a new thing, new or continuing, is how impressed we have been to see the leadership, the immediate leadership that Indigenous peoples took around COVID. So when a lot of the world was still numb, civil society didn't know what to do, Indigenous peoples came in doing the webinars, obviously through the internet. And I know Andrea organized so many of them, and others did. And this was a fantastic thing of the strength. It was another testimony of the amazing strength of the Indigenous movement for this. And the other thing that I feel is special right now is how Indigenous peoples should strategize with specific actors that were perhaps a little bit less active, like the World Health Organization. I mean, these are opportunities now for WHO, which has been one of our most difficult clients, so to speak, in Indigenous affairs. They have to speak out. How can we make them now speak out? The WHO has to speak out, and the General Assembly, as it's coming up, you know, in any resolution on COVID, it has to include Indigenous peoples. And for this reason, I think it's a fantastic idea that the report of our new special rapporteur on the rights of Indigenous peoples, Francisco Cali, will be on COVID and Indigenous peoples' rights. And lastly, I want to say, and Andrea mentioned it, how the value of traditional knowledge through COVID is again coming up, both in terms of medicinal plants, but also spiritual practices, but also political practices, like closing the borders of the communities that Indigenous peoples have known how to do to protect themselves over time.
Thank you so much, Elsa, and to giving that in a very elaborate way. The Indigenous diplomacy, you have been chief of the Secretary of the Permanent Forum for a while now. What do you think that the future will be post-COVID-19 of Indigenous diplomacy? Any observations of thoughts or ideas maybe?
I think that Indigenous, you know, I am learning from Indigenous diplomacy, which is very special. It is not just, my fellow panelists and friends said that, it's not like a common state diplomacy. Indigenous diplomacy is advocacy as well. It is trying to change hearts and minds, and Indigenous peoples have done it from the very beginning. So it's not just a permanent forum, and as Andrea said, it's broader, and Rodion mentioned, there are so many fora where Indigenous peoples are now, you know, spreading their efforts, their international advocacy, that there is no way back, you know, meaning in a good way. It cannot be stopped. It is only spreading. So, and I see various other characteristics that I would like to share, you know, in indigenous diplomacy. Les, I think I forget who mentioned, maybe Les mentioned, or Mariam mentioned protocols. So indigenous peoples have been pushing forward their own protocols in international fora, and that matters. So their diplomacy is also a way of bringing in their own rules. It's not just the UN rules, it's also their own rules and their own cultures and protocols that are meaningful for them at the United Nations. So that's another characteristic. And yet another that I know you all alluded to is, you know, the gender approach and the intergenerational approach. So you see at the UN, Indigenous Peoples Diplomacy, you see this collaboration, you know, with the gender, the elders, the youth, and all this plays together. And this is a fantastic characteristic that it should continue. Another one that I have learned from Kenneth Deere, because he used these words very, very wisely. He says, never lose the moral high ground. This is very inspiring, very important part of indigenous diplomacy. So indigenous peoples have continued to use that. And this is part of their diplomacy because they affect, I mean, what we have seen, and Andrea, I'm sure you've seen it too since the beginning. You see sometimes that diplomats of states have a certain line to keep, which is strict, but the diplomat person has been convinced by what the indigenous peoples are sharing in the room, you know? So that person that has been, whose heart and mind has been convinced, can play a real role in how they navigate the position of their government or in the multilateral relations. So these are very precious strategies of the indigenous peoples. Another characteristic is the link with grassroots people. I mean, indigenous peoples, whether they are NGOs, they are academics, whatever they are, it is that special link with the grassroots people, with the communities, that makes the voice, that has the impact in the international diplomacy. And last but not least, and I think this is a very important point, is that part of indigenous diplomacy is also to not be diplomatic when you should not be diplomatic. And you should not, and indigenous peoples are not absorbed by the dominant agenda, the mainstream agenda. They use it. They use the main international agenda, but they are not absorbed by it. So if they need to put forward this other topic, whatever that is, and for example, traditional knowledge has received such focus because indigenous peoples have strengthened that, have put that forward. So these are characteristics that of indigenous diplomacy that I will see continuing, you know, and I see them continuing also by younger generations of indigenous leaders like you, Ghazali, and you, Carson, you know, and I'm very inspired by that. I don't see why these learnings of the movement over 50 years should be lost, you know, they are just continuing.
I think that's a very good bridge, by the way, to the project that you're doing right now. I'm very interested to see it manifest. Can you tell us a little bit more about it and how we as a movement can contribute to it or help you with it?
Okay, maybe I should say first what this project is, although some of my fellow panelists have heard about it because I have interviewed them. So this project is about what fascinated me, impressed me so much, and taught me so much from 1982 or 81, really has become now a total obsession. I want to be able to tell and explain this story of Indigenous participation at international fora, also as an expression of external self-determination of Indigenous peoples. It is one of those expressions, external self-determination, which sometimes states don't understand well and think that it might be threatening, but it's not threatening. It's very constructive. So this project tries to tell that story from the point of view of the Indigenous peoples who participated, not just the rules of, but it is to understand exactly how Indigenous peoples were able to establish this exceptional participation, which, by the way, I call corrective exceptionalism, because it is a manifestation that states knew that they had done something wrong. They still know that. And they're trying to correct it by allowing these exceptions in participation. And of course, now Indigenous peoples are trying higher and higher participation, pushing like through the General Assembly that we know very well. So this is my project, and I have already interviewed a number of Indigenous leaders, and I would like to interview more leaders. Unfortunately, now we cannot meet face to face, but the help I would appreciate is if there are some younger leaders that are interested to answer some questions around this, it would be very enriching for this project. And for me, I feel that this project is part of the continuation, of passing on knowledge and information and understanding over generations. It's like bringing our experiences of the older people into the younger people. So.
Wow, thank you, Elsa. And just learned a new term called corrective exceptionalism. And I think, just to add something on there, this one has exacerbated the issue of member states or even some international NGOs and some UN agencies tokenizing the participation of the indigenous peoples. And so we definitely, about these new project that you're doing, we really support, and let us know what we can do to help you with a new project. First, I'm the first one that I would like to give myself to support you on that. Because time is running out, but I have two more questions, just one, and in a short time. What do we need to do today so that we don't regret not doing it in the next 6 to 12 months?
Another difficult question, but I will propose just 3 points. One is continue to go to the highest international political level. I think Mariam mentioned this as well. High political profile is super important, and COVID gives this additional or new opportunities for that. And don't hesitate to use harsh words when you need to characterize some practices as, for example, genocidal. We have heard this word, happen regarding the Amazon. So we should not hesitate using very hard words these days. The second is what I mentioned before about WHO and the General Assembly of the UN, making sure they always mention Indigenous in the context of COVID. And the third is make sure to build strategic alliances that this moment gives birth to. And I'm very inspired from what Native Americans did with the Black Lives Matter these days, with some very good, positive results. These days, there are more Columbus statues falling than we have seen, I don't know, since centuries. So, you know, in each country, there are different strategic alliances. Obviously, it's up to the indigenous peoples to analyze and to see who they are at a specific moment. But these are the possibilities of novelty and new social and political alliances that can strengthen indigenous peoples as well.
Wow. Then before I say something commenting, the last question. What about, just in a few seconds, what about something that we've not touched upon that you are proud of, curious about, and you want people thinking about?
You know, one big thing, international politics, because you asked me to think about international politics, right? Is that a room of people, full of people, in international political discussions is never the same unless indigenous peoples are there. This is so clear, and I just want to make sure to put it out there. There is no way to compare such rooms with or without the indigenous peoples. So indigenous participation at the international level has to continue to be strategic, to be informed, etc. But indigenous peoples have to be there, And to add also that this was a moment that I shared with the first chair of the Permanent Forum, Mr. Henrik Maga, right, from the Sami, where in the second session we were looking at the room. It was, I don't know, 1,500 people. It was very exhilarating. It was a good moment, right? And then we turned to each other and we said, but we cannot just be pleased because this permanent forum was created and it's high level and big deal. Unless the people come, it will not be what it has to be. So these are like my last words, that people have to continue making the effort of this intense participation.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much, Elsa. Thank you for your words. Thank you for your wisdom in supporting the movement. We will always pray for your strength and support system and for you to be in good health, always, to always be in this alliance. And the key takeaway here is yesterday's words by Ken was never lose the moral high ground. Thank you for reiterating today. It's key in combating the whole issues, the stereotyping, and giving you the strength to always say the truth. I mean, I can go back. It was the most powerful words